Hello, this is Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guest today is a political activist, playwright and novelist. He won the inaugural Harold Pinter Playwriting Award for If You Don't Let Us Dream, We Won't Let You Sleep at the Royal Court. His play Lampedusa has been performed in 40 countries, with projects in development for stage, film and television. Prior to his writing career, he'd been an international athlete and a Scottish 400-metre champion, a teacher on death row at San Quentin, California's most notorious prison, as well as some of London's biggest jails, a political activist arrested on 4 continents, a techno DJ, a tree surgeon and a carpenter. Three Burials is his debut novel. Anders Lustgarten, welcome to Meet the Writers.
Thank you for having me. It's a bit early for me, but that's writers for you.
That's just the most extraordinary CV. And I mean, writing is really the last thing on it. You came to it very late.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I didn't write anything until I was about 30. And I never really intended to write anything. Like, it was not a... I don't really understand or necessarily trust writers who know that it's the thing they've always wanted to do. Rather like politicians, I feel like generally if people really want to do that and nothing else, they probably shouldn't be permitted, or certainly should be encouraged to do other things first to give them something to write about. No, I was many different things. I have a sort of boundless curiosity about life and a need for experiences and lots of energy. And it was writing is an entirely accidental profession, but one I'm pleased to have nonetheless.
Absolutely, and so are we, because this is a wonderful book, Three Burials, and we'll get onto that in some detail in a moment. But firstly, how is it that you sound British, you have this Nordic name, and I do know that you're the son of American academics.
That's right. Yeah.
So who are you really?
I'm actually a spy. I'm deep undercover. Yeah, amazingly, even though I was at Oxford, nobody ever tried to recruit me for the security services. I can't imagine why.
And you were studying Chinese?
And I was studying Chinese. I think they tried to recruit everybody else in my class, but when they heard some of my opinions, they were like, don't waste your time on that, dude. So it's a long one. So my great-grandparents were Hungarian. They moved to America shortly before many of them disappeared during the Second World War. I have a Jewish background. And my parents are from New York City. They moved over here sort of to escape what they could see as the coming tide of neoliberalism. Unfortunately, it followed them across the globe, and I think to some considerable disappointment there. And my mum had a fixation with skiing and goat cheese, so she gave me a Scandi name. Scandi is about the one thing I don't have in my entire background. I lived in Denmark for a year, where unfortunately they pronounce it anus. And people go, oh, anus, you must speak Danish. And I was like, I don't speak Danish, and I don't understand why you have to refer to me as that.
Extraordinary. Your mother is, of course, Donna Dickinson, who's a very well-known philosopher. Written a lot on death and dignity.
Right. And medical ethics and particularly sort of, ethics within the medical profession and the political ramifications of that,
Very, very interesting.
My dad wrote a lot on legal control of the security services and racial discrimination. So they have an interesting background themselves.
All of this comes up in your book, and indeed in your other work too. So you study Chinese at Oxford.
That's right.
You then go to Berkeley. What did you study there?
Political science, Chinese politics. So I did a PhD over there. I was basically... So I sort of did Chinese as an undergraduate, partly because I sort of initially was looking at doing like PPE, which I soon worked out was essentially the training ground for the future rulers of the United Kingdom. And I grew up in Oxford sort of from a teenager onwards. And one of the good things about being exposed to the British ruling class from a young age is you're not afraid of them anymore. And you see how profoundly mediocre they are. And that mediocrity is really apparent now in our political decision-making and the way this country works or doesn't. So I was sort of quite quickly aware that doing PPE would basically be a form of... The British ruling class propagandize themselves before they propagandize everybody else. And they're very good at it and quite sophisticated. And I was like, well, I know there's a lot wrong with this country, and I know I don't really want to be taught how it works well, but with a little twist, which is really what PPE is. So I thought I'd study something that was sort of conceptually the opposite of Western society, but had a long history of its own, and I would learn about Western society by contrast. Didn't really realise that would just mean 2 years of making noises and learning a very difficult tonal language from scratch. When you're at uni, you want to start doing big ideas and abstract things and having ridiculous arguments in the pub. And you don't want to be learning a tonal language. But also when you find out 2 weeks into your 4-week course that you're tone deaf or not really tone deaf, but certainly not naturally gifted in the tones department. So it was graft. Like, I finished it, partly because I was very interested in the politics and the history, but it was graft. So I really wanted to do something where I could just do all the big ideas and the sort of thinking about interesting things. But I was a sort of professional athlete by that point. I was semi-professional 400-meter runner, and I could do both if I went to California and run around in the sunshine and eat burritos and also study political science. So that was awesomely good fun. But then I discovered after a couple of years that academia was, compared to my parents' generation, an increasingly specialised and introspective discipline where people really spoke a language that was quite impenetrable to normal people. And it was primarily looking inwards. It wasn't looking out. Academics don't really have as much of the sort of influence over policy and whatever as they did in other generations. They're mainly having to raise their own salaries these days. So I started an email came around when I was doing the PhD, asking for volunteers to teach at San Quentin. So I got there early thinking this was going to be, lots of people were going to want to do this. And I was the only person in the room. So they said to me, how you feel about teaching the death row people? And I was only 22 at the time. And I'm like, that's one of those things where you go, yeah, cool, that sounds like fun. They put me 5 floors underground with 20 murderers and a panic button on the other side of the room. Ooh. And that's one of those moments in life where you kind of go, okay, I could either cry and kind of bang on the door to be released, or I could crack a few gags, big up the British accent. Americans love the British accent, even people on death row, and, make it work and enjoy this experience. And I went for the latter option, and it was one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life. Actually, I found those people fascinating.
Was there any sense of kind of intrinsic evil in them? Are they different from people who haven't committed murder?
Honestly, they are more interesting to talk to than almost any other group of human beings. That doesn't make them morally better. It certainly doesn't. It doesn't necessarily make them morally worse either. But they've been in there a long time. So this was back in the day. But at the time, the average period between sentencing and execution was 14 years. And that doesn't count all the people who were released by the various different levels of appeal. So once you're in that system and there's a long time ahead of you, it really kind of concentrates your mind and gives you a sense of trying to make the most of whatever time you have left. So they were the most intellectually inquisitive people I've ever met in my life. And there were dudes that had been in there since before I was born. There was a guy who'd been in there since 1979. And they were just like, I was teaching the political science stuff for high-level undergraduates. Berkeley is, officially the best public university in America. And these dudes from death row were twice as interesting and 5 times as inquisitive as my undergraduate students. I managed to get a local, so they do a degree in there. Well, now I'm not quite sure how the system works, but they do a degree, like an AA degree, like a junior college degree. And there are certain stipulations they have to get the degree. They don't let them off just because they're on death row, which I think is quite a good excuse. But they basically were like, right, nobody has taught this one class for 7 years, and we want someone to come in and get everyone their degree. And I was like, what is it? And they said, it's art appreciation. And at that, I certainly had never been to the theatre at that point, and I didn't really know anything about art. And I was like, cool, man, I'll do it. So every week I would go to the Berkeley art department and I would bone up on a particular period in art history, and I would go and teach it to these people because they're so aesthetically deprived in there, right? All you see is concrete and bars. So they just drank it up through the skin. It was fascinating. And I got a local bookseller to donate 20 copies of 100 Great Works of Art. And I said, go away and write me an essay on one of these works of art and why it moves you. And some of the responses were like, I've still got some of them. They were so profound and interesting and so kind of unmitigated by received wisdom, because obviously they don't know anything about it. And that definitely has influenced all my artistic pursuits ever since. Mm-hmm. The combination of that, and then when I ended up finishing that and coming back to Britain and working in all the British prisons, where I first got asked to do a play with people, I've always worked on the basis that if a work of art cannot be understood by prisoners or anybody with a brain and an inquisitive mind but no formal knowledge of this discipline, it's not a work of art, it's propaganda. Mm-hmm. If you have to have gone to the Schauspieler Spooner's house in 1983 or seen an exhibit in such and such a museum, in order to get this, you are excluding people. It's a form of elite liberal self-protection. It's not art, which is intrinsically about reaching out to other people.
There is so much to talk about. You are so fascinating. So we've got to move on, sadly, because I would really like to explore that
you've only
topic.
got a finite amount of time.
But being a political activist and being arrested, what were you protesting?
So I did the prison stuff for a couple of years. Then I got banned from prison. I was the only person in Britain who couldn't get into prison, which was interesting.
Why were you banned? You see, we keep going off on these tangents.
Essentially because when you go into NICS, particularly Cat A NICS, you have to sign something or agree to something with the security department saying if you understand that things are deleterious to the security of the prison, you will report them. That includes drugs coming in. Drugs obviously come in largely through drones or through the guards these days. But you cannot inform and teach. You know, if you hear about stuff or you see stuff going on, you can't tell people about it. So some stuff happened. I didn't tell the security people about it. And lo and behold, they found an excuse to get rid of me. Guards do not want people educated. The intrinsic nature of education is to make people ask questions. The intrinsic nature of prison is to make people cooperate and not ask questions. So they're completely in contradiction to each other. So after I left the prison, I started working as an activist. And I was working basically on international development, which in my opinion is essentially contemporary colonialism. It's mechanisms, soft mechanisms, by which advanced economies crack open poor economies for future exploitation. And they do it particularly through the World Bank, the IMF. There's something called the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is based in London, DFID, the Department for International Development. And some of these projects that they do can be seen as beneficial in and of themselves, but they're part of a much wider intent, which is essentially to perpetuate Western control over southern resources. And the weakness in that system, so the reason they go for public funding, and again, they now do less of that than they used to because it's so easy for them to raise money on capital markets, but the reason they go for public funding is to get the reinforcement and the political support of Western countries should, this is the large corporations that are doing these projects, should the project go wrong. So quite often we end up paying for these projects twice. We end up paying once when we give large amounts of subsidies or support to oil companies, for example, to do pipelines. And again, when they go wrong and they have to be bailed out and they get given, again, huge sums of public money. So it's a really nefarious system that probably my biggest issue with liberalism is the pretense of being the good guys, is the absolute insistence on being the good guys while wanting all the benefits of the free market. And I think you can see the profound weakness in the political opposition, which is shortly to become the government, is predicated on that. Is predicated on the fact that we've had a neoliberal system for really 40 years, which has rewarded liberals for participation and without forcing them, like in previous generations, to take a stance against it, to have to inconvenience themselves or impoverish themselves and still feel better than they're not the bankers. They're not the people that do all the evil things. They're not all the speculators and the financiers, but they still get the house prices going up. They still get the cushy jobs and non-executive directorship. So I would say I come from an older tradition of when liberals and left-wing people had to pay a price, financially and otherwise, for what they believe in.
And of course, all of these things echo throughout your work. There's so much kind of, I would say, burning anger, really, about social injustice in your plays. Now, as you say, you started writing plays because of what you were doing in prison, but very quickly have become this very established playwright. I mean, your plays have been produced in, over 40 countries, I think. Lampedusa is the one about...
the migrant crisis, sure.
Yeah. And of course, Three Burials, your novel, is about that too. But so many other books that really... are a cri de coeur, if you like. Out of all of them, what would you say is the thing that drives you the most?
So what drives me the most is clearly finding ways to say important things. I'm quite fearless. I would say that's my best quality. But my second best quality is I'm funny. So what I do is I take things that, certainly in mainstream politics, people aren't really willing to talk about very much. And I make them accessible and I make them surprising. So... I would be reluctant to describe my work as angry. I would say it is honest. That would be probably the best way of saying it. Because if people think it's just a shouty left-wing dude shouting about left-wing things, they will be surprised. So what I quite often come with is perspectives you're not expecting. So I would say I write more right-wing characters with empathy than any writer I can think of. And maybe there are other writers I haven't thought of, and I apologise to them. But I surprise people by coming from an angle you're not expecting, and I make it funny. So probably my best play, actually, is called The Seven Acts of Mercy. We did that at the RSC about 5 years ago. And that is, it's set up like a Caravaggio biopic. It's the first painting Caravaggio did after he killed someone and had to run away from Rome and set himself up in Naples. And he's got no protection and he's kind of out on his own. And half of it is about his relationship with his life model, a woman who is a prostitute. He gets off the street to play one of the characters and he doesn't really think much of, and he turns out to be a better artist than him. And he's quite surprised by that and a bit challenged by that. But there's a modern half, and it jumps 400 years back and forth in juxtaposition to Bootle in Liverpool. And it's a dying ex-docker who's teaching his grandson about life through this book of paintings, the sort of classic working class tradition of autodidacticism. And his grandson decides to do 7 modern acts of mercy for his granddad before he dies, with fairly disastrous results. And it works really, really raw because I think they pitched it as a Caravaggio biopic, But it's all about austerity, the great crime of the 21st century in this country, what is happening to working class communities. And we did that at the RSC, like proper shire folk, not necessarily people that would have come to see a play that was a critique of austerity. And they were in bits. I mean, they were like, and you could hear it on the relay. And that was great because what you do is you get the thing about humour and surprising perspectives is you get people's guard down. Like you've fundamentally got to write drama, and you've got to surprise people. You can't let them get ahead of where you're going. No matter how smart your political analysis is, if we can see where you're going with it, we lose the whole dramatic intensity. So you get people's guard down. The first line of that is Caravaggio, who speaks with a contemporary Scouse accent, kicking this corpse and telling it to move around because it's not much use as a life model. And it gets people's guard down. It makes them open to things and it makes them feel stuff. So that's what I'm good at.
How did you then go from the plays to the book? Because the book is in 3 acts, like a play.
Yeah. It's quite structured like a play. So obviously the theatres closed during COVID, and not knocking the theatres, but they haven't really reopened. Like they lost so much money, and they are at the absolute epicentre of culture wars. So they're quite nervous. Theatres have the kind of people that go maybe has restricted in the last few years because a lot of people have less disposable income. The theatre is not as adventurous, I would argue, at the moment. And my agent was like, how about writing a book? Like, she read Lampedusa. She was like, that's really good prose fiction. You could write a book. And I was like, nah, I don't reckon so. They're really long. And what if it's rubbish? And she was like, write 10,000 words and I'll tell you if it's good. So shout out Eugenie. She got me on that. And I wrote 10,000 words. She said, this is great. Write another 20,000 and we can put it out there. And I did. And you know what? It's really enjoyable because it's quite good, I think, to start from something that is structurally quite condensed. All you have in the theatre is dialogue and stagecraft. So when you get this bigger toolbox, you get this bigger paint set and a bigger canvas, you can do prose description. You can say what is happening inside the character's head. You can jump back and forth really easily between multiple voices and times and places. I was like, this is cool, man. You can kind of just stretch out and enjoy it. So I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was quite empowering. I found it, I really enjoyed writing it, and I'm writing another one.
You're writing another one. We'll come to that in a moment. So, 3 Burials. Cherry Bristow is the main character. She works in a hospital. She's a senior nurse. And, well, it's crazy for me to summarise the book.
You summarise the book.
You say it.
So, essentially, another thing I do to get people interested is I often use genre because people are familiar with that and it makes them comfortable. And they slip into it like an old overcoat or something. And they're less reticent, or they're more open to the things you might have to say. So this is basically a road movie in a small country. I like to describe it as like Thelma and Louise, except there's 3 of them and one of them's dead. It's about this woman, a nurse. It's set down in Hastings where I live. It's about a woman who finds a dead body on the seashore. So we get a lot of the little boats coming over and the planes going overhead and all that. And it's about a woman who finds a body on the shore and realises it's a refugee, and realises from the subsequent police cover-up that the police killed him. And so she kidnaps it from a hospital to try to she finds a picture on the body and she tries to find the girl in the picture. But in the course of it, she has to kidnap a racist policeman on the way. So
Brilliantly
there's
done.
a dynamic between
Yeah.
them in the car, which is quite enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we were talking about your mother earlier, and this kind of reflects that, because what she wants to do is give this man a dignified burial. She wants him to be reunited with the person he loves before he goes. And all of that sort of speaks to your early experience. And then, of course, so much about refugees and stuff. There's one fantastic little passage here. I just want to find this. This is Omar, who's
the
a refugee.
kid, yeah. We have some backstory of him, yeah.
And he talks about the journey. He says, this journey is constantly testing you, setting out obstacles and digging pit traps, seeing if you have the practical and moral wherewithal to get by. You cannot survive this odyssey without both luck and courage. If there was ever a chosen people on this earth, it is those who make it through this trial by fire and water and bureaucrat. If we had the courage they do, we would write them into our songs and stories. And I just thought that was so affecting. And you are writing them into your stories, and that's wonderful.
Trying to. And you try and do it in a way that doesn't... You try and do it in a way people are not familiar with, so it doesn't make them victims and it doesn't make them completely selfless heroes. But it makes... I do think I write very moving stuff for a political writer. Like most political writing maybe is more analytical or more... I try and combine the humour, the heart and the meaning. And that's always what I've tried to do as a writer. Those are the keystones to make... if you've got something to say, that's the way to say it. And yeah, I think it works well in terms of the narratives coming together. You know, he's sort of... It's mostly... There's quite a lot of propulsion. I kind of work... A lot of modern novels are quite long and not a lot happens a lot of the time. And I'm like, what are you doing? I work on the basis of kind of constant captivation, I think, from the theatre. So in the theatre, you have to keep people's attention at all times. Ironically, you don't actually have to do it with dialogue. You know, you can do it with subtext or you establish the relationship between the people. But you can feel the longeurs in the theatre. You can feel when people are not paying attention. And actually, that's really good as a training ground for a writer, because I don't read reviews. You can't take any kind of knowledge for your own craft from reviews, but you can take it from the reactions of audiences in front of you. So I'm always like, let's keep it moving, let's keep it moving, let's keep it moving. So there's an energetic propulsion through the story, but that also gives you the latitude to look back at times and give you the kind of the backstory of Omar. Yeah,
I love how very, very contemporary it is. It feels absolutely up to date, and it's such a critique of the government and the way things are run here, but done, as you say, with humour, but also just said in the way that we speak.
Right.
It's authentic. It feels...
That's what it comes back to, that thing about the prisons. So it's like, again, who are you talking to? Are you trying to impress a refined set of people who are interested in high culture and whatever, and good luck to those people? That's not who I'm interested in talking to. I'm interested in talking to people, and that's why I started with the plays, because I did them in prison to begin with. The very first play I did, a mate directed a version of directed Accidental Death of an Anarchist, you know, the Dario Fo play about the police killing a prisoner. And she asked me to rewrite it to be about the Stephen Lawrence case. And we did it with the prison cast and inmates, and they were so into it. They were just yelling and shouting and going on stage to argue with the characters in person. And I was like, this is a way of talking to regular people in a way that art should. And that's my whole intent is to talk to a wider audience, to talk to regular people who might be intimidated by some, you know, literary fiction or elite theatre or whatever.
We never even got to the DJing.
Oh yeah, well I just do that for fun, and and yeah, I find writing, I wouldn't say easy, but I find writing quite, you know, not too tough. But I find sitting on my own all the time quite difficult. So I do tree surgery, which involves climbing trees and cutting bits off at height with a chainsaw, and also carpentry. So I like to do practical things, physical things, as a corollary to the sort of abstract intellectual philosophizing.
Has the theatre lost you forever? You're writing another book.
I'm writing another book. The second book, oh my days, it's really good fun. You will enjoy that. It's called Kill Billionaire. And it's basically about a 14-year-old Australian girl who is an outdoor person. You know, she lives in the back and beyond. And her woods catch fire because of climate change. And she's just got a very clear moral clarity about billionaires did this, we must eliminate billionaires. So she recruits this Fijian ex-special forces guy, and they go around whacking billionaires in a variety of entertaining and surprising ways. And it has all these political connotations. And they go across the globe, and it's really, really good fun. So I'm in that at the moment. I'm working on a couple of TV things, which hopefully will lead somewhere. I would go back to the theatre because I really enjoy... The thing I'm perhaps concerned about with a novel is I don't know how I will see people respond to it. Like, obviously, there's online things and all of that. But the awesome thing about doing a play is you hear people laugh and you see people moved and you see people respond. And, when we did 7 acts or Lampedusa, people come out in pieces. And that is a very satisfying thing. So I really enjoy that. But yeah, you ask the theatre if they're done with me. That might be the thing to ask. Like, do they want me back in the room? Because we'll have to see. And do they want me back in the room doing the stuff I do well? We'll have to see on that. But I enjoy the theatre, so yeah, maybe.
I can't imagine anybody not wanting you back in the room.
We'll have to ask them.
Thank you so much. Please come back
pleasure.
to this room very soon.
I most definitely will.
3 Burials is by Anders Lustgarten. It's published by Hamish Hamilton. And you've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the production team of Tamsin Howard and George Ruskin. You can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.